Welcome. Is Chara the narrator of Undertale? This is a question our generation's greatest thinkers have been pondering for eons. Some scholars are adamant that they are the narrator, while others are skeptical. NarraChara is legitimately one of the most hotly debated theories in the fandom, and I've seen many unhinged arguments about it. Me personally, I've never had very strong opinions about this theory, mostly because the posts that give the most comprehensive look at the theory are super long and I'm lazy as fuck. But recently, I've decided to do some research into the theory, and oh boy, I have a lot to say about it. So, in this video, we're gonna do a deep dive into the NarraChara Theory and present all the evidence for and against this theory. We'll weigh the evidence, and hopefully by the end, we can come to an informed conclusion on if Chara is the narrator or not. I just want to point out that a lot of the arguments I'm about to make aren't very original. Many people have made them before. It kinda comes with the territory when you're making theories on a game that's been obsessively analyzed for like 10 years. But I personally use the Determinators post on NarraChara, as it's the most comprehensive post on the subject. The link to it will be in the description below. I highly recommend you read it. Now, let's get into the video. So, before we can get into the evidence for and against NarraChara, I think it makes sense to do a deep dive into Chara's character. Otherwise, this video would feel incomplete. Not to mention, it's also useful to develop a psychological profile for Chara. I just realized I've been calling them Chara and Chara. This is gonna be a long video. I'm gonna try, you know what, I'm gonna call them Chara from now on because it's short for character. That's what I'm gonna call them. I'm probably gonna slip up and call them Chara. It is what it is. Now, if you're already an expert on Chara's lore, you see, I just fucking did it! If you're already an expert on Chara's lore, then you can just use the timestamps to skip this section. But I know a lot of you haven't played Undertale in a while and you could use a refresher on the finer details of Chara's story. Not to mention that a lot of you are probably just putting this video on in the background while you're doing work or chores and you don't really care what I'm talking about. So, without further ado, let's get into things. We'll start from the beginning. When you first boot up the game, you'll see a child climbing Mount Ibit in the year 2020X and falling into the underground. Then you'll be asked to name this fallen child. Most people will name them after themselves, but if you name them Chara, the game will call this their true name, so that's what I'll be referring to them from now on. After that, the game starts and we find ourselves laying on a flower bed after the fall. The sequence of events leads us to believe that the person we're now controlling is the same person we named and saw fall down in the beginning. And as we play through the game, we receive more information that this assumption is correct. The human fell down in 2010X, and the current year when the game came out was 2015. The menu and battle screen prominently displays the name Chara next to our stats, and the save menu also displays the name Chara when we save. When you die and get the game over screen, you'll hear someone saying, "You cannot give up just yet. Chara, stay determined." So it seems like the person we're playing as is Chara. But then the signs start appearing that something weird may be going on. The first sign is when Undyne knocks us off the bridge. You'll hear a conversation between an unknown person and Chara, the fallen human. "Oh, you've fallen down, haven't you? Chara, huh, that's a nice name. My name is..." and then the voice cuts off. That conversation definitely didn't happen when we took control of our character. In fact, the first person we encounter after falling down is Flowey, so what's going on here? When exactly did this scene happen? Most players will probably see this scene and find it a bit odd, but will ultimately brush it off and move on. When we get to Asgore's castle, in his basement, we'll find the coffins of the 6 fallen humans, along with an empty coffin. This coffin has a red soul on it, and the name Chara. Most players will see this and conclude that this grave is for us, and that Asgore has already prepared for our death. But this isn't the case, as we'll see. As we walk through Asgore's house, the monsters will tell us the tragic tale of the first fallen human. A long time ago, a human fell into the ruins. They were injured by the fall and called out for help. Asriel Dreamer came to their aid and brought them back to his home. Asgore and Toriel took the human in and treated them like their own child. This child also became best friends with Asriel. They spent many happy years together with the family until they fell deathly ill. As they lay dying, they had only one request: to see the golden flowers in their village one last time. But they died before that request could be fulfilled. And in a fit of grief, Asriel absorbed their soul and transformed into a being of incredible power. He crossed the barrier with the human's body and took them to their village and laid them on a bed of golden flowers. The humans in the village saw the monstrous form of Asriel carrying a child's body and assumed Asriel killed them. The humans attacked, and Asriel refused to fight back. As they dealt more and more blows to him, he simply walked back to the underground with the human's body. He collapsed on the bed of flowers in Asgore's castle and died, his dust spreading on those flowers. This situation devastated Asgore and Toriel, and in a fit of rage, Asgore declared war on the humans. Yada yada yada, Toriel became disgusted with his actions, she left. She took the human's body with her and gave them a proper burial in the ruins. It also seems she took some golden flower seeds with her, the human's favorite, and planted them on the human's grave. So yes, the patch of golden flowers we fall on in the beginning is likely where the human was buried. So this is what you learn about the fallen human if you play a neutral route or a flawed pacifist route. An eagle-eyed player can already infer that the person we named at the beginning is not the person we're controlling, it was the first fallen human. The conversation we heard when we first fell off the cliff was a flashback of Azrael helping the first fallen human, Chara. The words of encouragement we hear when we die are Asgore encouraging Chara on their deathbed. The coffin in Asgore's basement with Chara's name on it was for the fallen human a long time ago, not really for us. An even more eagle-eyed player will probably realize that none of the characters actually call you by the name Chara, they simply call you the human, which is awfully strange. But I understand that not everyone figures this out on their first playthrough, I know I didn't, but this theory is basically confirmed on the pacifist route. But that's not all that's shown. So far, the fallen human has been portrayed in a very sympathetic light, but on the true pacifist route, we see a much darker side of the fallen human. On this route, you gain access to a secret area called the True Labs, and the True Labs is a set of VHS tapes made by the Dreamer family. Alfie said she gathered these tapes so she could research humans and find any info about their souls. She says she doubts Asgore has seen these tapes and thinks that he never should. How ominous. The first tape is pretty innocuous, it's just Toriel and Asgore joking around and being excited about the birth of Azrael. The second tape is similarly as wholesome. It's just an unknown person asking someone named Chara to make a creepy face for the camera before realizing that the lens cap was on the whole time. This, again, basically confirms that the person we're playing as is not Chara. These tapes are supposed to be very old, and our character recently fell into the underground, not to mention that this scene just never happens in our playthrough. So this Chara can't be us. It's also implied that the unknown person talking to Chara is their best friend, Azrael. The third tape is where things get interesting. Azrael tricks Chara into smiling for no reason by pretending to take a picture of them. Then Chara starts talking about the time they accidentally poisoned Asgore because they put buttercups in the butterscotch pie instead of putting cups of butter like the recipe called for. Azrael said he felt really bad about how sick Asgore got and should have just laughed it off like Chara did, which shows they're maybe a little unhinged, just a little. He asks Chara where they're going with this, and Chara tells them to turn off the camera. The fourth tape takes place after Chara tells Azrael about some plan. He says he doesn't like the sound of this plan and starts crying. Chara seems annoyed by this, so Azrael stops and says big kids don't cry. This might imply that Chara belittles Azrael for crying and tells him big kids don't cry, which points to a darker side of their relationship. Azrael calms down and says that Chara is right and that their plan will free everyone. He says he'll go get the flowers, presumably the buttercups. The last tape takes place on Chara's deathbed. They're laying on their bed deathly ill, and Asgore tells them, "Stay determined, you can't give up. You are the future of monsters and humans." This basically confirms that the dialogue in the game over screens is one of Chara's memories on their deathbed. The tape ends when Azrael tells Chara that he doesn't like this plan anymore, but strengthens his resolve and says he'll do it. 6, right? We just need 6. Okay, so what can we glean from these tapes? It seems that Chara didn't just randomly get sick and die, and Azrael didn't just spontaneously decide to absorb their soul and cross the barrier. This was all a plan. Chara intentionally killed themselves with buttercups so that Azrael could absorb their soul and cross the barrier. Then he would kill 6 humans, take their souls, and use the combined 7 human souls to destroy the barrier and free all monster kind. But you know, since they're literally 12 years old and 12-year-olds tend to be pretty stupid, their plan goes to shit and they end up dying for nothing. Yay! So, after finding these tapes, you finish up what you're doing in the True Lab and you go to leave. As you're leaving, you get a mysterious phone call from an unknown person who addresses you as Chara. The mysterious caller thanks us for our hard work and says that everything has fallen into place. Spooky. When you meet up with Asgore and the rest of your friends, Flowey steals the human souls and ambushes you. He absorbs the 6 human souls along with every monster soul and transforms into his true form, Azrael Dreamer. Bum bum bum! He addresses us as Chara and asks us if we're still there. Then we have a surprisingly easy boss fight with him. During this, we appeal to his humanity by bringing up his relationship with Chara. He says he can't let go of Chara and that they're the only one who understands him. Then we see a flashback similar to the one we see at the beginning of the game. except this one shows Asriel helping Chara and being adopted by their family. Reminding Asriel of Chara gives him a change of heart and he stops fighting. He finally admits that we aren't actually Chara, and that Chara has been dead for a long time. He asks us what our actual name is, and we answer Frisk. Then he uses the 6 humans along with every monster soul to destroy the barrier. Woohoo! After we get our happy ending, we can walk through the underground one more time. If we walk all the way to the golden flowers in the ruins, we can talk to Asriel a bit more about Chara. He says that Chara hated humanity and they climbed Mount Ebit for an unhappy reason. He says that he doesn't know why he ever thought we were Chara, that Chara wasn't the greatest person, and that he was probably projecting onto us because we're the type of friend he wished he always had. He tells us that when he absorbed Chara's soul, the control of their body was split between them. When they got to the village, Chara wanted to use their full power to attack the humans, but Asriel resisted and they both ended up getting killed. So already we see a much darker side of Chara and their relationship with Asriel. It's implied that they bullied Asriel for crying too much, and that they pressured him into doing this frankly insane plan that he was extremely uncomfortable with. And finally, when they got to the humans, they wanted to use their full power against them, which implies that they either wanted to kill a bunch of humans, or they wanted to kill them in a particularly cruel way, due to their hatred of humanity, which is not a great look for Chara. This also puts into question Chara's motive for wanting to do this whole plan in the first place, because up to this point, you might still see Chara as a bit of a hero for being willing to sacrifice their life for a chance at saving monster kind. But it seems like they didn't do this sacrifice to save monsters. Instead, they did it to gain power so they could get revenge on humanity. Or at least that's how I've seen a lot of people interpret their actions. I do want to defend Chara a little bit, because if they were truly as evil as people think they are, they didn't really need to kill themselves to get revenge on humanity. They could have easily just killed Asriel, absorbed his soul, and crossed the barrier and done whatever they wanted to. Or if they didn't want to kill Asriel, they could have killed Asgore or Toriel and gotten the same result. Clearly, things aren't as simple as Chara just hates humanity and is willing to do anything to get revenge. It's very possible that they wanted to use their full force against the humans because they were trying to defend themselves. And even if they weren't, the whole point of doing this whole plan was to kill humans and get their souls to break the barrier. So of course they're going to use their full power against the humans. Humans are very powerful, and it makes things much easier. I just thought I would mention that because I'm sick of seeing all the Chara slander. Yes, they seem to be quite manipulative towards Asriel, and they might have even been mean to him. And yes, as we will see, they are quite evil on the genocide route, probably because they're soulless and lack the capacity to feel compassion, but there are a lot of nuances to their character that people don't give them credit for, especially since they're implied to be a victim of child abuse or some sort of severe trauma if their hatred of humanity is anything to go by, and there's no evidence that they didn't love monster kind and didn't want to set them free. They overall just seem like a traumatized child with a lot of flaws, but not without any redeeming qualities. Alright, so that's Chara on the pacifist route. Now let's look at Chara on the genocide route, and really get into why people think they are the narrator of this game. Because oh boy, if you think that the pacifist route makes Chara look bad, the genocide route turns everything up to an 11. So once you trigger the genocide route, we begin to change. For lack of a better words, we fall under the control of Chara. Frisk moves without our input, the tone of the narration begins to change, and Flowey even insists that we're Chara. You're not really human, are you? No, you're empty inside, just like me. In fact, you're Chara, right? But let's talk a little bit about the narration and how it changes on the genocide route, because this has led many people to believe that Chara is the narrator. This is best seen in the narration for Asgore's house. The narrator is just clearly Chara in these moments. My drawing, his bed, my bed, our clothes. I've read this already. I unlocked the chain. The date I came here. It's me, Chara. Yeah, so what's going on with the narrator? Why are they suddenly Chara? Well, let's step back for a second and let's just talk about Undertale's narrator in a general sense. You see, Undertale doesn't have a traditional omniscient narrator like a lot of RPGs have. Its narration is mostly in second person, but it occasionally switches into first person. This is very unusual. Rarely in literature does the narrator switch perspectives in consecutive sentences. This narration actually reminds me of one of my favorite book series of all time, A Series of Unfortunate Events. I promise this is relevant. In the book, the narration is mostly in third person omniscient, meaning it's told from the perspective of a third person narrator that knows and sees everything. But occasionally it'll switch into first person, This is because the narrator is not an objective narrator, he is a character in the story itself. He knows all the events of the story because he's a journalist who investigated the situation himself. Not to mention it's implied he made a bunch of shit up, but that's besides the point. A series of unfortunate events has a diegetic narrator, meaning the narrator exists within the context of the story itself. He mostly tells the story in third person, but will sometimes switch to first person when he's talking about himself. Why do I bring this up? Because something similar may be happening with Undertale. Its narrator could be an actual character in the story, who mostly tells the story in second person, but occasionally slips up and switches into first person. And since these first person sections are clearly narrated by Chara, that would imply that Chara is the narrator for the entirety of Undertale. I admit this is a bit of a leap in logic, so let's list out all the things we know for sure about Undertale's narrator, and then we can get into all the evidence that points to Chara being that narrator. What do we know about the narrator of Undertale? Well, for one, we know that the narrator isn't all-knowing. There are some things they just don't know, and they sometimes say things that are straight up wrong, and even demonstrate a capacity to learn new things. Here are some examples. The narrator doesn't initially know what a water sausage is, but after Frisk reads about them in a book, the narrator suddenly knows what they are and can even correctly point one out. The narrator incorrectly states that monster candy has a distinct non-licorice taste, but after Frisk tries one, they're revealed to taste like licorice. The narrator incorrectly calls Chiron tone deaf, but after hearing her sing, they call her a talented singer with a little help. If you interact with the golden flowers at the beginning of the game, the narrator will say, "Golden flowers, they must have broken your fall." The narrator assumes the flowers broke our fall, but doesn't know for sure, they're just guessing, which means they're definitely not omniscient. The narrator is also unaware of Mettaton's weakness and seems genuinely stumped during his quiz show. And it's not as if the narrator is playing coy or withholding information from us. They tell us outright how to spare monsters if they know, and yet they don't know about the giant switch on Mettaton's back. In the True Lab, the narrator says something happened that didn't, and Frisk has to correct them? It's really weird. You say something like, "You look horrible, why are you even alive?" What, you didn't say that? You laugh and keep laughing. It's so funny, you can't stop. Tears are running down your face. What, you didn't do that? Interestingly, Chara is known for using laughing as a coping mechanism, as many monsters are. I just thought I'd point that out. If you check Sans during his fight, the narrator will say, "Sans, 1 attack, 1 defense. The easiest enemy, can only do 1 damage. Clearly wrong, no elaboration needed." In fact, it seems like the narrator is actually unaware of monsters' stats unless they explicitly tell them. Glide, attack high, defense high. Refuses to give more details about its statistics. So I guess Sans lied when he said that he had 1 attack and 1 defense when he actually didn't, and he somehow tricked the narrator who was supposed to know everything. So as you can see, the narrator is far from being omniscient. In fact, their knowledge appears to be limited to things Frisk knows and experiences, but that's not all they know. They seem to also know things that Chara knows. Exhibit A. What a comfortable bed. If you lay down here, you might not ever get up. This bed happens to be Chara's bed, and what's interesting about this is that the narrator doesn't react to Asriel's bed in this way, despite the beds being identical. It's a twin-size bed. They only react to Chara's bed this way, which means there's something about this bed that the narrator knows about. Well, it just so happens that this bed is Chara's deathbed, and the narrator knows it. If you lay down here, you might not ever get up. This is a clear reference to the fact that Chara laid down on this bed and never got up. Why does the narrator know where Chara's deathbed is? Especially when they're far from being omniscient, and they only seem to know things that Frisk knows. Well, what if they also know things that Chara knows, because they are Chara? Going back to the genocide route, we know for a fact that Chara is the narrator of that route. Exhibit B. While we're in Asgore's house, when we know that Chara is narrating for a fact, the narration is very cold, short, impatient, and angry. Stovetop, nothing useful, still has that sweater, no chocolate, I've read this already, the entries are all the same. The narrator isn't like this just in Asgore's house. They're like this throughout the entire genocide route. Where are the knives? In my way. Wipe that smile off your face. Forgettable. That comedian. 16 left. Determination. A worthless pile of snow. Nothing for you. It's as comfortable as it looks. Monster Kid. Looks like free XP. I see 2 lovers staring over the edge of a cauldron of hell. Do they both wish for death? That means their love will end in hell. I couldn't stop laughing. What the fuck am I even reading right now, like? And finally, it's me, Chara. This narration is in Toriel's house, at the very beginning of the genocide route. So as you can see, Chara is narrating throughout the entire genocide route. But what about the pacifist and neutral routes? Well, remember the lines that show that the narrator knows where Chara's deathbed is? Well, those are on the pacifist and neutral routes. At the end of the pacifist route, if you look at your reflection in Toriel's house, the narration will say, "Still just you, Frisk." This is probably Chara talking to Frisk, which means that Chara is narrating in the pacifist route too. The you is always Frisk, and the me is always Chara. But that's not all. Some of the jokes that you can tell in the pacifist and neutral routes are directly related to experiences Chara has had, implying Chara suggested them to Frisk. You tell a joke about a kid who ate a pie with their bare hands. You tell a joke about two kids who played in a muddy flower garden. You tell a joke about a kid who slept in the soil. The first joke refers to the fact that Chara used to eat pies by Toriel. The second joke refers to the fact that Chara and Azrael used to play in Asgore's garden. And the third joke refers to the fact that Chara was literally buried in the soil under the golden flowers in the ruins. The narrator also seems to have a character of their own. For example, the narrator is impatient at times and pokes fun at us for our incessant checking. Piles of garbage. There are quite a few brands you recognize. Just garbage. Garbage. A trash heap. Your persistent garbage habit shows no signs of payoff. His metal body renders him invulnerable to attack. His metal body still renders him invulnerable to attack. Seriously, his metal body is invulnerable. If you wash your hands in the sink repeatedly, they'll say, "You really like to wash your hands." And then there's the snowpoof joke. It's a snowpoof. And this is a snowpoof. This, however, is a snowpoof. Surprisingly, it's a snowpoof. Snowpoof. Is it really a snowpoof? Behold, a snowpoof. Eh? There's 30G in this one. What is this? Even they're surprised that our search pays off. This impatience is similar to the impatience Chara displays on the genocide route, just toned down and more humorous. The narrator also becomes very critical of our actions. You took more candy. How disgusting. You took another piece. You feel like the scum of the earth. You took too much too fast. The candy spills onto the floor. Look at what you've done. Despite what seems like common sense, you threw away the letter. Wow, you're super fast at being wrong. Partaking in worthless garbage fills you with determination. You tell Snowdrake that no one will ever love them the way they are. They struggle to make a retort and slick away utterly crushed. Chara also takes a critical view of our actions in the genocide route. You felt the sins weighing on your neck. The potted plant is judging you for your sins. That comedian got away. Failure. You think you're above consequences? You are racked with a perverted sentimentality. Like, damn, so judgmental. Moving on, there's this thing in the game called Serious Mode. It essentially removes all of the jokes from the battle menu and makes the game more serious. For example, Butts Pie becomes Pie, Unicicle becomes Popsicle. You get the point. Serious Mode turns on very few occasions. During the genocide boss fights, Toriel's fight, Asgore's fight, and Azrael's fight. Conveniently, the narrator becomes very solemn when we're fighting members of Chara's family. I wonder why. In the check description for Toriel, it says, "knows best for you." Could this be how Chara sees their adopted mom? If you kill Toriel and go back and check her stove, the narration will express sadness for her death. No one will use this anymore. This implies that the narrator was someone close to Toriel, and that they're sad about her death. The narrator also seems to try and defend monsters in the check dialogue. This monster is too sensitive to fight. Don't pick on him. It seems evil, but it's just in the wrong crowd. Knows best for you. Chara lived with monsters for a very long time, and they presumably treated them better than humankind did, so it makes sense that they would respect and even defend monsters. If you check the Worn Dagger, the narrator will say, "Worn Dagger, perfect for cutting plants and vines." This might imply that Chara is the narrator since they used to garden with Asgore and probably use this exact dagger. There are 4 times where the narrator is rendered speechless. One is when we look at the Dreamer family photo at the end of the genocide route. The others are during the boss fights of Toriel, Asgore, and Azrael. As I've shown before, Chara was definitely narrating whilst in Asgore's house, which means that they did say the flavor text for the family photo. So is it not at all possible that they're also narrating during these 3 boss fights? The reason that they're reduced to silence being because they're fighting their own family members. This would be especially upsetting to them because Toriel and Asgore both insist that the only way forward is to kill them. When we receive that phone call from Azrael, the narrator seems genuinely shocked. If the narrator is Chara, then it would make sense why they would be shocked, since as far as they know, Azrael is as dead as a doornail. They also seem quite shook during Asriel's entire boss fight, as in their words are literally shaking. Flowey also talks to Chara directly at the end of the pacifist route, implying they're always with us, even in the pacifist route. So please, just let them go. Let Frisk be happy. Well, that's all. See you later, Chara. This is after Flowey/Asriel has his character arc and accepts that Frisk isn't Chara, so this is definitely not Flowey talking to Frisk. Another piece of evidence that Chara is always with us is that we see their memories at various points in the game, regardless of what route you're on. I know I said this in my recap, but I'll say it again for the people who skipped my Chara recap. You know who you are. I put a lot of effort into that recap, just so you know. Anyway, we see Chara's memories at various points in all routes of the game. When Frisk goes to sleep, you hear, "Chara, please wake up. You are the future of humans and monsters." When you fall off the ledge, you hear, "Oh, you've fallen down, haven't you? Chara, huh? That's a nice name." When you die, you hear, "You cannot give up just yet. Chara, stay determined." Another interesting thing about the narrator is that they seem to be able to access Frisk's thoughts and comment on them. "Look at these cool toys. They don't interest you at all." They seem to be disappointed by Frisk's lack of interest in the toys. The fact that they think these toys are cool may imply that the narrator is also a child, like a certain someone. It makes double sense if Chara's the narrator, since these would be their toys that they enjoyed playing with in their life. Now let's talk about the narrator's state of mind, because it changes depending on how many people we kill. And all of this can be gleaned from the flavor text from interacting with a bag of dog food in Alphys' lab. I'm not kidding. If you've killed no one, the flavor text says, "It's a bag of dog food. It's half full." If you've killed someone, it says, "It's a bag of dog food. It's half empty." And if you've killed at least 21 people, including all of the dogs, it says, "It's a bag of dog food. It's half empty." You remembered something funny. This is clearly a play on the glass half full, glass half empty thing. When you're on the pacifist route, the narrator is optimistic. If you're on the neutral route, the narrator is pessimistic. And if you're on the genocide route, or on a no mercy route, the narrator is sadistic. They particularly find humor in the fact that they've killed all of the dogs, and the dog food is now useless. Why does the narrator feel differently depending on how many people we've killed? Well, if Chara is the narrator, then this makes perfect sense. You see, their best friend Asriel's perspective on life is that it's never okay to take a life. When Chara and Asriel crossed the barrier and he refused to fight, even as the humans attacked them, their plan failed and they both died for nothing. Depending on how you look at things, Asriel essentially betrayed them, depending on how you look at things. If you make it through the game without killing anyone, then you've proven to Chara that Asriel was right. It's never necessary or acceptable to take a life. Which means Asriel didn't really betray them, he simply did the right thing. So the narrator, who is Chara, has a positive outlook on their situation. However, if you've killed someone and strayed onto the neutral route, you've just shown Chara that there is a situation where it's okay to take a life, which means Asriel was wrong, which means Asriel betrayed them. Therefore, the narrator is pessimistic. And if you've killed a lot of people, not only have you shown that Asriel was wrong, but you've taught Chara to find sport in killing people. After all, killing people increases your love, and the more love you have, the easier it is to take a life. So they're full-blown sadistic. By the end of the genocide route, Chara is unrecognizable. In the pacifist and neutral routes, Asgore sees Chara in Frisk, but by the end of the genocide route, Asgore doesn't see Chara and Frisk and doesn't even recognize them as human. Chara was not always evil. They were actually somewhat nice. The genocide route is ultimately what corrupted them. This is evidenced by what they say at the end of the genocide route. "At first, I was so confused. Why was I brought back to life? You. With your guidance, I realized the purpose of my reincarnation. Power. Together, we eradicated the enemy and became strong. Before, they had no idea why they were alive. But when we started killing people, they realized why they were awakened. To gain love, i.e. power, and destroy the world, which is what they do. They're even surprised when we say we don't want to destroy the world, because they assume that the reason we were killing so many people was that we could remove all attachments we had to the world and become strong enough to destroy it. That's what they think becoming strong means. It means to gain love, which is the amount we're able to distance ourselves from other people and from the suffering of others. So when we outright refuse to destroy the world, Chara is surprised and kind of annoyed. They realize there was no greater purpose to our actions. We were simply doing it for fun. They're even further upset with us if we reopen the game and try to play again. They accuse us of thinking we're above consequences, and to punish us, they make us sell our soul to them to get the world back. And even after that, if we go on to complete a pacifist route, They'll show up at the end to ruin our happy ending and remind us that we are not above consequences. If instead we do a second genocide route, they're even more baffled by our actions, accusing us of being racked with a perverted sentimentality. Either way, Chara was not always evil despite being soulless, but their worldview changes depending on how we play. Now, Chara is soulless. When Flowey calls us Chara, he assumes that the soul we have is stolen. If Chara is the narrator and is with Frisk from the beginning, then this assumption is correct. But a question you may be asking is, if Chara is sharing our soul and mooching off of our soul's determination or whatever, wouldn't they be compassionate? Because beings with souls tend to have compassion. But we know from our conversation with Chara that they are incapable of feeling compassion. They are soulless. They can't understand these feelings we have for the characters of Undertale. Well, I would argue that Chara is neither sociopathic nor super compassionate when they woke up and attached themselves to our soul. They were kind of just in the middle. Let me explain. When Flowey turned into Photoshop Flowey, he had all 6 human souls in his body. You'd expect him to start feeling compassion or love, right? But he's still evil. He's still sadistic. A similar thing happens during Asriel's fight. He literally had the 6 human souls in every monster soul in him, yet he was still evil. Why? It's because the feelings of these various souls in his body weren't his own and he didn't understand them. That's why he didn't instantly turn good when he was Photoshop Flowey, or the god of hyperdeath. I still can't believe he calls himself that, like that's so incredibly cringe. But anyway, it's only when we appeal to his emotions and his feelings of love for Chara that he finally turns good. And this really gives him a new perspective on life. Because even after turning back into Flowey and becoming soulless again, he's different. He no longer sees killing as the answer. He even begs us not to reset the world since that would ruin everyone's happy ending. And he would have to go back to being the bad guy. This change of heart is most pronounced in the pacifist route, but it's seen on certain neutral routes as well. I've been thinking, is killing really necessary? I honestly don't know anymore. I have a request for you. Prove to me you're strong enough to survive. If we start killing people after he says this, he gets mad at us, despite previously encouraging us to kill people. So killing people is actually fine. Sure. I'm glad we could agree on the value of a life. I learned so much from you. The point I'm trying to make is that soulless people can learn and they aren't necessarily evil. They lack empathy and the ability to form bonds with other people, but that doesn't mean they don't have a moral compass or they can't learn to value life. Chara starts out feeling confused, but as we play the game, their attitude changes. If we play peacefully, they learn the value of life and have a positive outlook on their situation. If we play violently, their outlook begins to darken and they no longer value life as much. The more we kill, the eviler they become and the less they value life. By the end of the genocide route, they're a complete monster who wants to destroy the world. And all of these complex character motivations can be gleaned from some flavor text for a bag of dog food. Man, Toby Fox is a good writer. A question you may be asking at this point is, if Chara was with us from the beginning and is narrating the story, how did they become attached to us? I believe they became attached to us when we fell on the golden flowers in the ruins, which just so happens to be Chara's grave. Where is the evidence that this is Chara's graves? Well, you would hear about it if you had listened to my recap, which I worked very hard on. But okay, you decided to skip it, so I'll just explain it again. Chara isn't in the coffin in Asgur's basement anymore. Toriel took their body a long time ago and buried them under the golden flowers in the ruins, which means the flower patch we fall on is likely Chara's grave. I didn't mention this in my recap, but this is further supported by Toriel's actions when we defeat her. She goes back to the flowers. She likely thinks that by letting Frisk leave, she's doomed another child to death. This makes her think of her own child, so she goes to visit their grave. I believe that when we fell on Chara's grave, they somehow attached themselves to us. And I'll discuss how this could have happened later. Another thing to note about Chara is that they call themselves a demon that comes when people call its name. At the beginning of the game, we name the fallen human and literally call their name. Does that mean that Chara was awakened in that moment? I think so. I can even pinpoint the exact moment Chara wakes up. At the beginning of the game, there's no narration. There's no dialogue when we interact with the golden flowers. Chara's name doesn't show up at the bottom of the battle menu, like it does in every other fight. It isn't until you beat Flowey that you finally hear some narration. If you interact with the flowers again, you can get some dialogue that you couldn't before. This is the exact moment Chara wakes up. Okay, so let's say Chara did attach themselves to Frisk, because they fell on their grave. How exactly does this work? The same way that Flowey's resurrection works. Azrael used to be sleeping peacefully until a flower with his essence was injected with determination and he woke up. When Frisk fell on Chara's grave, they came into contact with some of Chara's essence. Frisk's determination, the power that awakened me from death, woke Chara up in the same way. Chara went into the vessel that could support their soulless essence, which was Frisk's body. As for why Chara attached himself to us and not any of the other humans that fell down, it's probably because Frisk's soul is the same color as Chara's. It seems that Chara's essence is only able to attach to the same kind of soul they had in life. You're probably asking, so Chara is possessing Frisk, does that mean they're controlling them the whole time? I believe that Chara's connection to Frisk works in a similar way to when Azrael and Chara were sharing a body. The control of the body was split between them. There's some evidence of Chara controlling Frisk's body. Chara performs minor actions on their own in the pacifist route. It's a history book. Here's a random page. This is slightly different than when Frisk opens a book and chooses a random page. It's an encyclopedia of subterranean plants. You open in the middle. If Frisk tries to give Grifftroff after giving them 35G, they are stopped. Hey now, you aren't made of money. There's even a moment where the narrator basically forces us to do a certain thing. But how can I tell Undyne the truth? I don't have the confidence. I'm gonna mess it up. How can I practice? Let's roleplay it. Obviously, let's roleplay it. They take a backseat and mostly allow Frisk to do what they want, but they still see what Frisk sees, smells what Frisk smells, tastes what Frisk tastes, and feels what Frisk feels. The same is true for the neutral route. Chara will occasionally stop Frisk from doing things, but that's about it. You thought of telling Toriel that you saw her die, but that's creepy. In the genocide route, Chara takes a more active role in controlling Frisk. They routinely move on their own during Papyrus's puzzles. They charge at Monster Kid without our input. They charge at Mettaton without our input. They kill Flowey without our input. And when we kill Sans, he initially dodges our attack. So Chara hits him again and kills him without our input. Overall, Chara takes a more active role in the genocide route. But this has nothing to do with the fact that we have more love in that route, as I've seen many people claim. Because they move on their own during the Sylvan sections when we don't really have that much love. In fact, the love you gain during this section is similar to the amount of love you can gain during a neutral route, yet Chara doesn't move on their own then. So it's not that Chara gains more control of the body as we gain love. They always have the ability to take control, they're just more enthusiastic in the genocide route. Overall, love doesn't inherently make you more powerful. In fact, it's not really a power at all, it's simply a measure of how much you're willing to hurt people. But why does Chara take such a backseat to controlling Frisk in the pacifist and neutral routes? It's probably because Chara likes Frisk and trusts their judgment. They seem to regard Frisk affectionately. They excitedly point out Frisk in the mirror. It's you! They sing them a nursery rhyme on their first check. Dummy, attack 0, defense 0. A cotton heart and a button eye. You are the apple of my eye. They call Frisk cute. Temmie, attack 7, negative 20 defense. Loves to pet cute humans. They seem impressed with Frisk and they refrain from killing anyone throughout the whole game, despite being put into many deadly situations. Despite everything, it's still you. They also lightly tease Frisk. You were intimidated by Froggett's raw strength. Only kidding. You wave your arms wildly. You are now vulnerable to electric attacks. But despite allowing Frisk to call the shots, they still try to help them in any way they can. They give them all the useful information they know to Frisk. They give information about the monsters Frisk fights, they point out weaknesses, suggest battle strategies, and even tell Frisk how to spare a monster outright if they know. They also give information on the various armors, weapons, and healing items they collect. They even advise Frisk to decline an invitation from Muffet. Muffet, 8 attack, 0 defense. If she invites you to her parlor, excuse yourself. In the pacifist and neutral routes, Chara refrains from identifying themselves to Frisk, likely because they are an introverted person. This is evidenced by the Dreamer family photo, where Chara covers their face with flowers, indicating they're a shy, anxious person. In the genocide route, they proudly proclaim they're here. It's me, Chara, because they see Frisk as their best friend. Where's the evidence of this? Well, as I said before, in the genocide route, we teach Chara that it's acceptable to kill. That means that Azrael was wrong and he betrayed Chara by refusing to fight. This would be an extremely painful betrayal because Azrael was Chara's best friend. So as a coping mechanism, they project their previous relationship with Azrael onto Frisk. This is similar to what Flowey does to Frisk too. I don't know why I ever acted like you were the same person. Maybe, the truth is, Chara wasn't the greatest person. Well, Frisk, you're the type of friend I wish I always had. So maybe I was kind of projecting a little bit. When Frisk equips the best friend forever locket that used to belong to Azrael, Chara says it's right where it belongs. They also say this, "Right, you're a great partner. We'll be together forever, won't we?" They act as our partner by encouraging us during battle. Can't keep dodging forever, keep attacking. But even though Chara is more active in the genocide route, they still allow us to be in control most of the time since we're friends. Even at the end of the genocide route, they give us the courtesy of asking what we want to do, even if it doesn't really matter in the end. You must have misunderstood, since when were you the one in control? One last thing I want to mention is that Chara seems to be a weeb and the narration reflects that fact. Like, remember that weird line about two lovers standing over the cauldron of hell that's under the Czech dialogue for the royal guards? Well, that quote is from a Japanese book called Kitchen, apparently. There are a lot of anime references in the narration, like the narrator calling cacti the most tsundere of plants, or the zone where Alphys complains about Mew Mew Kissy Cutie 2 being called the bad opinion zone. I guess you're a fan of Mew Mew Kissy Cutie 2. I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so that was the entire NarraChara Theory. I just wrote nearly 8,000 words. And what is the recording time? I have been recording for an hour. Alright. Shout out for the Determinator for making their post on NarraChara. The research and level of detail in that post is just top tier. I didn't include everything in their post, and I also restructured their arguments a lot, so I highly recommend you read their full post for more details. Anyway, that was all the evidence that Chara is the narrator. It's pretty damn convincing. I mean, I was pretty convinced. But this isn't the end of the video. Now that I've laid out all the evidence for NarraChara, I must go over the evidence that's against it, because this theory isn't perfect and there are quite a few holes in it. But before we do that, if you're enjoying this video so far, consider checking out the rest of my channel. All I make is Deltarune and Undertale theory content. If you end up liking it, make sure to subscribe. And if you really want to support me, you should join my membership program or Patreon. Please, Patreon. I have no patrons. Alright, begging session over. Let the debunking begin. Let's start with the claim that the narrator isn't all-knowing, that they only know things that Frisk and Chara knows. This is simply untrue. They do possess knowledge that Frisk and Chara couldn't possibly know, and they do routinely read the minds of other characters like an omniscient narrator would. There are many examples of this in the game, especially in the battle dialogue, but the biggest example of this is during Azrael's fight. The narrator always knows what the lost souls are thinking and feeling, something Frisk and Chara couldn't possibly know. You tapped the lost soul lightly. Something about the way you fight is familiar to her. You told the lost soul that you'll continue to support her. Something about the way you said that is familiar to her. You hug the lost soul and tell her you're going to see her again. Something about this is so familiar to her. You get the picture. How does the narrator know what they're feeling? Like, how do they know this feels familiar to them? Examples of the narrator just in general knowing things that Frisk and Chara couldn't possibly know includes the cube in Alphys' lab. Somehow, the narrator knows this cube is actually a bed folded up into a cube? Like, how would anyone know this? Obviously, the narrator's knowledge is wildly inconsistent. Sometimes they know everything, other times they don't know everything. It all just depends on what Toby is going for in a given scene. If he wants to show that Frisk doesn't know something and then learn something, then the narrator will play along and pretend not to know it and will pretend to learn it. If Toby wants the player to know something important, or he's trying to make a joke, suddenly the narrator knows everything. Or at least it knows things Frisk couldn't possibly know. It's really similar to Deltarune's narrator. Sometimes it knows everything, other times it only knows things that Chris knows, and other times it doesn't know things Chris should know. This is just how Toby writes his narrators. They're wildly inconsistent because they're non-diegetic and they change to fit a given situation. So when the narrator points out Chara's deathbed, this isn't evidence that the narrator is Chara, because as I've established, the narrator just knows shit sometimes. Clearly, Toby just wanted to make a dark reference to Chara's deathbed, and that's what he did. It's that simple. Now let's address all the evidence that points to the narrator having a personality that's similar to Chara's. Yes, the narrator pokes fun at us for our excessive checking. This doesn't prove that Chara is the narrator. A generic, non-diegetic narrator is allowed to make jokes and is allowed to get annoyed. They're allowed to be impatient. That doesn't mean they are Chara, especially since the level of impatience Chara displays in the genocide route is much more angry and serious than these light-hearted jokes. Which, by the way, some of these light-hearted jokes are still in the genocide route when Chara is supposed to be super serious and no nonsense, like the snowproof joke or this cactus joke. Ah yes, After participating in the murders of 80 people, Chara is still making silly fucking jokes. Kinda undermines the character arc Chara is supposed to be going through in this route, but okay. Now the theory also mentions that the narrator is very critical of our actions just like Chara, but most of the examples given are obvious jokes. Like the monster candy joke, do you really think the narrator is genuinely judging us for taking too much candy from the candy jar? Like, no, these are just jokes. They aren't at all comparable to when Chara is seriously critical of our actions. Like, we're really comparing these jokes to Chara deconstructing our actions from the top down. A generic, non-diegetic narrator is allowed to make jokes. This doesn't mean they're an actual character with a consistent personality, and it certainly doesn't mean they're Chara. Moving on, let's address serious mode. Serious mode activates during the fights with Chara's family members, and it also activates during Undyne's fight and Sans' fight, two people who are not members of Chara's family. Chara doesn't give two flying fucks about Undyne, and they hate Sans, so why are they being all solemn and serious during their fights with them? Especially when they initially don't take Sans seriously. Serious mode is obviously just a creative decision on Toby Fox's part. He wants these boss fights to be serious moments, so he removes all the jokes that could clash with this tone. Like I've established before, the narration is constantly changing to fit a given situation. If Toby wants a scene to be serious, then the narration will be serious. If Toby wants a scene to be silly, then the narration will be silly. If Toby wants a scene to be creepy, then the narration will be creepy. Speaking of the narration being creepy, let's address the True Lab dialogue. You laugh and keep laughing. It's so funny, you can't stop. Tears are running down your face. What? You didn't do that? This line is extremely confusing whether you believe Chara is the narrator or not. Like, did the narrator just lie and say something happened that didn't? Or did we actually laugh, but the narrator is trying to backpedal on it? I think the answer to all this is really quite simple. The narrator is just trying to be creepy. As I've established, the narrator's knowledge is extremely inconsistent. Sometimes they know everything, other times they don't. Sometimes they say things that are straight up untrue. It all depends on the situation and the kind of tone Toby is trying to create. The goal of the scene is to be creepy, so the narrator follows suit. The entirety of the True Lab fights are narrated in a very bizarre, experimental way, so I don't think we should read too much into these lines. I've heard some people say this line is Chara using humor to cope, but this isn't the case. This is not Chara describing how they feel or something they're doing. Because when they describe how they feel, they use first person. This line is written in second person, which means it's describing how Frisk feels. First, they laugh, then they backpedal and claim they never did that. They're confused. They don't know how to handle the situation. The narrator is simply trying to convey that fact. But what about the dots in the boss fights? This was probably the weakest piece of evidence used because, like, what about them? Chara is not the only person in the game that says ... Many other characters say it too. So this isn't evidence of anything. Like every other piece of evidence that I brought up before, the ... is meant to convey a certain tone. In this case, a serious tone. That's it. The same can be said about the narrator seeming shocked when Azrael calls us, or their text shaking during his boss fight. These moments are meant to be shocking to the audience. The reveal that Azrael is alive is a big one, so the speed and the shaking of the narration is meant to convey that. Let's talk about some miscellaneous quotes that are claimed to be said by Chara. Toriel knows best for you. This statement is true. Toriel does know best for you. Chara isn't the only person allowed to say things that are true. And even if you don't think it's true, Toriel is a motherly figure. A common thing said about mothers is that they know what's best. This line is simply in theme with her being a mother. It's designed to portray her in a sympathetic light and to achieve a certain effect. No one will use this anymore. This is true. Again, Chara is not the only person allowed to say things that are true. This could be Chara feeling sad that their mother is dead, or it could be a non-diegetic narrator trying to create a sad tone since we just murdered our beloved goat mother. Worn dagger, perfect for cutting plants and vines. This one is pretty innocuous. Like, I guess Chara might have said this because they like to garden and possibly use this dagger to garden, but it could have easily just been said by a non-diegetic narrator. I mean, it seems like Asgard does use this dagger to garden, so this statement is again just true. That's it. Finally, let's talk about the state of mind changes, the dog food dialogue. This is probably the strongest piece of evidence that Chara is the narrator, but I just want to give a different perspective on these lines. Perhaps these lines are the narrator's attempts to portray Frisk's state of mind. The same logic would apply as before. On the pacifist route, they're optimistic, on the neutral route, they're pessimistic, and on the genocide route, they're sadistic. It's definitely possible. And that's ultimately the goal of a narrator, right? To convey the state of mind of a character. Okay, so what is happening here? Most of the lines used to support NarraChara are just a bunch of nothing burgers, and they're heavily cherry-picked. And the narrator's inconsistent knowledge seems to outright contradict the theory. So it seems like Chara can't be the narrator. But if that's the case, then who is saying all of this? Who is saying it's me, Chara? Well, before I explain what's actually going on here, I just want to point out one thing that I think NarraChara got right. I do think that Chara attached themselves to us when we fell on their grave, and I do think that they're with us throughout the entire game, regardless of what route we're on, that the control between our body is split between Frisk and Chara, and that sometimes they take over. I also believe that those Chara-related jokes I brought up earlier were suggested to us by Chara. Those things the theory got right. It's just clear to me that Chara isn't actually the narrator of Undertale. Like, Undertale clearly has a non-diegetic narrator, but what about all of these lines? Clearly, they had to have been said by Chara. Well, if you actually play the game and read all the dialogue instead of just reading a few cherry-picked lines, it becomes clear what's actually happening here. Chara isn't narrating these lines, they're speaking these lines. Let me explain. The narrator is pretty consistent throughout all routes of the game. The descriptions are the same, the jokes are the same, but on the genocide route, there are these random outbursts where the narrator will say something Chara-y, for a lack of a better term, and then they'll go back to their normal narration like nothing happened. What a nice smell. Too hot to eat though. The stovetop is very clean. Toriel must use fire magic instead. Where are the knives? There's some white fur stuck on the drain. For some reason, there's a brand name chocolate bar in the fridge. It's a great reading chair. It doesn't seem like anyone uses it. The coals are so warm. Nothing useful. Seems like a gardening tool. There's some white fur stuck in the drain. No chocolate. It's a trash can. It's full of crumpled up recipes for butterscotch pie. I've read this already. Clearly, Undertale has a generic, non-diegetic narrator that is narrating most of the time. It doesn't have a concrete personality, its knowledge is inconsistent, its tone changes to fit a given situation. This narrator is consistent throughout all routes, but occasionally, Chara will speak over that narrator. They do this in all routes, but they're exceptionally talkative on the genocide route. That explains all of these lines that you see on the genocide route. It explains why these moments are so jarring. It's because someone completely different from the normal narrator is talking in these moments. I feel like this is a pretty good middle ground answer to the NarraChara theory. It explains all of these lines while accounting for all the problems that comes with the normal NarraChara theory. Alright, this is the end of the video, and I'm fucking tired. This script is 10,000 words long. I have been recording for an hour and a half. I never want to hear anything about Chara or narrators again, or I will literally crash out like the fucking stock market. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you didn't enjoy the video, make sure to leave a dislike and a death threat in the comments below. And of course, make sure to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I always love to see all the interesting discussions down there. I would say keep things civil, but watching people argue is kind of funny, so conduct yourself accordingly. Thank you to my wonderful members, PF247, Silly Willy Billy Silly, Grey Leno, Shoshi, Frenchinator, Wolfish Mass, Lucas, Faloop, Ritalin, and Ronan Faria. Thank you for watching my video, bye bye!